are the greatest warplanes ever built. Where is it? Russia. You've got to steal.
Alright, so as promised, we're going to go into a little bit more of a deep dive of how these players work and how we can actually disassemble one. The player that I've got in front of me is our parts player. Unfortunately, when we were trying to repair the players that we had, one of them did not quite make it. This one seemed to be the worst off from the start and had a number of failures, not limited to the mirrors, which will be the main focus of this video. So I'm going to take the opportunity that this dead player presents and show you guys a little bit more about how it actually comes apart. Alright, so we're going to start with the lid. These things, this mystified me, admittedly, when we first got one of these. To open the lid, you have to stick a screwdriver through this hole here, up into the top, and disengage the latch. Notice I already have it open. It's because I do not want to do that, because it's very much hit or miss. So I'm going to open the lid and just have that open right now. The start of the disassembly of the player involves removing two screws right here. For the purposes of this video, all the screws are already removed. So you remove those two screws and push it forward and up, and this panel is removed. At that point, you open up the top of the lid. At the top of the lid, there are two screws at the top here. You remove those. It allows you to pull the plastic cover up, leaving only the mechanism. This part is important, and we're keeping it. Now, you're presented with a number of screws here. Most of these are going to be actually removed already. There will be a few here and a couple here. You want to remove those and remember where they go. And then you can push this section forward and it will rotate off. So then you can remove it. This gives you access to even more screws, at which point you will want to remove this one here and these screws along the periphery, which will enable you to pop off the main panel. This screw, although it's present here, has actually already been unscrewed, so it's not really of consequence. So then you're able to tilt this back. And what you want to do is push this all the way up so that it clears the top clamp of the disc and forward so that you can remove the entire plastic covering, exposing the Laserdisc player mechanisms inside. A little bit of anatomy here. This is the laser. It's a 40 watt class 3B laser. Do not look into it. Sorry, it's 2 milliwatt max output, but it's 40, so yeah, don't look into this thing, ever. It comes out here. This is the laser aperture, and it traces through the optical path. Now normally, there would be a covering here. This is black plastic. And to remove the covering, before you even attempt to remove this piece of black plastic, you would take a screwdriver and pry in from the sides here to try to pinch the covering out and then remove it upwards. Then you would take two screws out here and pinch in these two tabs to remove this covering. Again, this optical deck is partially disassembled, and when I say partially, I mean almost entirely. So what we've got in here is the actual optical slider, which is clipped in on its rail, and the headers for mounting the mirrors. The optical path moves from the laser aperture here to this mirror, to the two focusing mirrors underneath the optical head, and up through the lens to the disc. The focus of this repair, as described, is the repair of the two mirror assemblies that are mounted in here. This is an example of one such assembly. The idea being, see on this post here, which is currently detached because we did have a failure, the mirrors will tilt using these coils, which are actuated through here, to align the laser with the disc as it is spinning. The common failure mode on these is that the adhesive which attaches the magnets to the mirrors fails, so that the magnets will stick to the coils, and then the alignment mechanism will become inoperable, and thus the player becomes inoperable. What we're going to attempt to do is gently probe those mirrors, see if they rotate. That one seems stuck. So does this one. Which means this Laserdisc player probably has the issue we're talking about. So what I'm going to try to do now is pull this mirror and magnet assembly out of the housing. So the thing is held in place by this brass tab, which is twisted. So what I'm going to do first is untwist the brass tab and then push it out. It's likely that one or both of the magnets in here are detached and are preventing the mirror from rotating fully. So the first thing we have to do is use a pair of needle nose pliers to make sure that the brass tab is as vertical as possible. And then you're supposed to be able to push it out. Now, I had difficulty pushing it out on the other one. So what I ended up doing was taking the whole assembly, grabbing it at the corners, and pushing down on the table so that the mirror pops out. As you can see, one of the magnets is detached already from the assembly and is in the back of the assembly. So what I'm going to do is take this Sharpie and mark the polarity with 2 dots. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, and 1 on the magnet, which is currently obscured. So I'm going to push it gently to one side so I can put a single dot on the magnet.
Don't you need 2 dots on the magnet?
Oh, sorry. I almost screwed myself. Thank you, honey.
No worries.
I can barely see that other dot. There we go.
And it looks like it's a little offset on the right.
Yeah, it's just because it's tilted because of the magnetic field right now.
Okay.
So what we're going to try to do now is get this the rest of the way out. And I didn't really have a great solution for this because I don't want to pull it or touch the front of the mirror. And my brilliant solution is push it from the back with a screwdriver and hope for the best. Do this over top a soft surface so that if the mirror falls out, it lands someplace very soft. And like most things, this is harder than it looks.
The mirror is really pretty.
Yeah, atomized silver mirror. Why couldn't they just use regular mirrors for this? Instead, using some super fragile, ultra duper mirror. Okay. Now, the needle nose, I might actually be able to grab that, maybe? If only I had the longer ones. These have tweezers.
Do you want me to try pulling the sides of the mirror?
You can, maybe. It's just, we don't want to rip it off of the goo.
Oh.
Because it's not actually held in place with any kind of hinge for all you viewers. It's just held in place with this sort of quasi-adhesive goop. And that's what allows the mirror to rotate. So we don't want to wreck the goo.
Do you want me to get the smaller pliers?
I got it.
Okay.
So just gently extract this.
That one's a lot more angled.
It's still got a mirror attached to it, which is pulling at the post. So I'm going to let it down, although it's trying to hold on to the pliers because it's magnetic. Now we can see that the other magnet is still stuck in there in its little alignment crevice. So making sure to preserve its orientation, I'm going to use this pair of tweezers to pull the magnet out. And then I'm going to put a dot on the magnet before I set it down, indicating its alignment. And as you can see by the fact that I'm holding a broken one, these things are very tricky to fix. So to tell you more about how we developed a safer and more effective method of fixing these, let's talk to Sam.
So what you have to do to fix these is you have to actually go in, take these out, and then you have to re-epoxy the magnets on. But when we started doing this, Liam was following a guide, and it was very detailed. And I remember him saying that if X goes wrong, just get a hammer and hit the whole Laserdisc, because you screwed up so bad that you're never going to recover. And so there was so many of these quote unquote hammer moments related to the actual fixing of these mirrors. And so Liam literally came to me and he's like, Sam, I know you're busy, but could you help me with Firefox? Because these mirrors are so tedious, and they're super small. Liam has big hands and is also just like not as, I'm a little bit more less fidgety, if that makes sense. Like I have more stable hands. So he wanted me, because the guide basically instructed you to just re-epoxy each magnet by hand, and just go in and just hold the size of the mirror and hold the magnet and just hold it precisely for 15 minutes, or so we were using 5-minute epoxy, but you want to hold it longer to make sure it really sets. And essentially I was like, okay, Liam, I'll do whatever you want, like I'll help you, but as I started doing it, I started getting really annoyed, because when my brain thinks that there's a better way of doing something, it just can't handle doing the less efficient thing very well. Because I was kind of like, Liam, why don't you just make a jig? And he's like, well, the guide doesn't say that you should use a jig. And I was like, Liam, when was this guide made? Like, how old is this guide? Like, we have a 3D printer. I am literally a mechanical engineer. I can design you a jig. Like, we're talking, like, this is, like, basic stuff. At least for, right? I have, a bachelor's and a master's in mechanical engineering. So, it's in my wheelhouse. And, anyways, so I kind of fought him on it because he was very stubborn, because he wanted to follow the rules of the guide, because he's, just scared that he's going to mess up and we're not going to get Firefox. But I'm very stubborn myself also. And I basically was like, well, why don't I just make you a jig and we'll see what you think. And so I designed version 1. And essentially you can see it has a very similar geometry to the inside of the mirror assembly. And so all I did, we'll show some extra footage, but I essentially just took measurements of all the components, and then I added a little bit of extra tolerance on either side, so the component would be able to sit inside and have a little space, but not enough space is going to move. I have a big bore in the center so that the post can fit through, and then basically enough room for each magnet, and then little side posts to make sure that the actual mirror doesn't move around while you're gluing it. The benefit of this is you can just, as you can see here, we actually had a second version just because the first version, my tolerances were a little bit less generous than they needed to be. So you can see this one we re-glued already. And so the post is off, so I'm not going to put it in, but you can see that you can slide in the magnets on both sides. And then you can see it kind of just sits nicely in there. And again, this is a nice way where you're a little bit more relaxed as you're doing it. So you can put in the magnets where they're supposed to go, apply the little bit of epoxy that you need, and then put the mirror on. And then you just let it sit, we let it sit overnight. And so then you're not worried about, any time, you should be really cured at that point after the 5-minute epoxy. And yeah, once we started using these, they're actually we ended up printing some more, so we have another one, because there's 2 of these assemblies on each Laserdisc, and we have 3 of them. So I don't think, we haven't fixed, obviously these are not fixed, but we fixed at least 2 to make one Laserdisc work. But yeah, so that's essentially the process. But yeah, it's nice to have jigs, and we're gonna try to put this online open source it, so if someone else is doing this very niche build, they can also print themselves a little a jig. Though apparently there was a little bit of a failure where some glue got stuck to one of the posts and it had to get ripped off. But luckily, I mean, this print is like a 30-minute print with, you know, negligible cost of material, so I don't think it's the worst thing if you have to, you know, if sometimes it breaks and you have to print a new one. Yeah.
Keep in mind that for the repair of this player, this circuit board section can be loose, so you don't want to mess with it too much because it will prevent you from having an easy time aligning it when you're putting the player back together. Second, the optical assembly is held in with a plastic insulator, which is currently not here, it's in my box of parts. You want to remember to put that insulator back, otherwise you will short out the player. And when you do put it back, make sure that you secure these two clips here and here. Otherwise you're not going to be able to align the player and you're wondering why everything is not working. To remove the optical head, you're going to have to remove these two clips. Just use a pair of needle nose pliers. Just grab them and pull them out to lift the entire optical assembly out. And we'll talk more about the specific assembly of the optical stack in a moment. Alright, so now as far as putting the machine back together, I apologize because I'm an idiot and was too excited to put things back together. I forgot to take video. In general, it is the reverse of taking it apart. Just backtrack your steps and try to put everything back together. You don't need to put together the whole machine for testing, just the configuration shown here, where you have the optical stack reinstalled and the player top left off. A note about reinstalling the optical assembly. When putting the mirror assemblies back in, take note of the mirror calibration screw. I found it useful when taking them out of the player before removing the calibration screw to take a photograph of them, as well as marking on the head of the screw the current position with a paint pen or Sharpie. When putting them back in, I would advise to not screw them in entirely, leaving maybe a quarter turn before the marked location. This is because the aluminum block that they're mounted to, it's difficult to unbend if bent too far, resulting in a potentially bad configuration. And now we can get to the fun stuff. Once you have the actual mirror assemblies installed and the optical stack rebuilt, it's time to set up your test environment. Here shown is the disc spinning inside my player with a light in the back. That's actually an endoscope allowing me to see into the player from my laptop. Have a little NTSC capable television or something. You don't actually need Firefox at this stage, but you can try to get some image out. I will say that most likely you won't get anything out on the first time. You'll probably hear the player spin up or spin down, or make awful noises like this one where it can't find a lock. This is not a bearing on the player necessarily, it's just a sign of poor mirror calibration. Unfortunately, you're probably going to spend a lot of time doing this, just adjusting the calibration screws on the mirror 1/4 step at a time, in and out. Eventually, if you do this enough, you will be rewarded when you spin up the player for the umpteenth time by getting some image out. It'll probably be very grainy, because I learned something. Without the player actually attached to the game, the player will fast forward through the disc, at least it did on mine. So you might see something that looks rather glitchy or rather accelerated. That's just because it's fast forwarding through the disc really quickly. As you can see in this particular video though, it got a little way through the disc and then lost sync. That's because the mirror assembly was not perfectly centered or not even remotely centered enough. But once you get that far, it's time to attach it to the actual game. So here's the tour.
Okay, so today is Figure Out Firefox Day. We're going to work on the Laserdisc player, so let me give you a quick tour of the setup. So back here we have the player taken apart with the Laserdisc mounted. We know this player partially works, so we're going to focus on trying to tune the mirrors today. This black cable is actually an endoscope being held in place, which is connected to this monitor over here, so I can monitor the mirror's position. The player itself is hooked up to the original wiring harness, and we're going to be using the original Amplifone raster with a mystery modification that I'll talk more about in another video, and we're going to try to see if we can get some image out. So why don't we give it a quick shot. Player spinning up. got some weird noises, but that's okay. And nothing. Pulsing is bad.
Don't be disheartened if you don't get an image out of it on the first try when you hook it up to Firefox. Firefox is a sensitive machine, or at least ours is, and moving the player around probably isn't going to help anything. When you do get it hooked up, use test mode in Firefox, as one of the pages in Firefox will allow you to page through the disk at normal speed or at fast forward. You're going to want to be able to get through the whole disk eventually. Now when you do get an image out, it's likely not going to be perfect. It will eventually fail and produce a loud static sound and screw up the screen. If you're watching the mirror assembly at the time that one of these static events occur, you'll see the mirrors deflect slightly. Listen carefully and watch carefully as it does this. If you note the direction that the mirrors are moving, you can use this to adjust the calibration of the mirror for each given mirror to more directly center them. Once the mirrors are centered, you should be able to get the actual image out. Okay, so if you were lucky or persistent and you manage to do the calibration and get a successful image of Firefox, when you turn it on, you should be able to get gameplay.
Now this thing is quite something when you turn it on. It sounds like a jet engine itself. Starting off with, boy, is this a machine. And then it will slowly spin up all the cooling fans in the system. It's not very happy when you run it at high temperatures, but eventually you'll get the main image when the Laserdisc comes up to speed. Just give it a few seconds. There we go. So from here, we can take it and see if we can play a game. The objective of the game is to go through the route as shown in the movie, shooting down other Firefoxes and protecting your own plane. So I'm going to choose the medium difficulty, which is the 6,000 mile mission. And we start off with these radar detections coming up on screen. If you shoot all of them, you won't get detected, which earns you a bonus point system. If you do get detected, missiles will start coming after you. And you want to preserve your fuel, so you have to shoot down all the missiles and the additional planes. Shooting down planes when you get to the checkpoint in the midpoint of the game will give you additional fuel. Changing your altitude from ground or sky will reset your detection meter, which allows you to get the bonus back if you missed it previously. And again, every plane that you were able to destroy will give you bonus fuel later on. The main trigger buttons, the main trigger buttons allow you to shoot your machine gun, and the thumb buttons allow you to shoot missiles. You only have 4 missiles, and you get refueled at the submarine. A missile will take out a plane in a single shot, and the machine gun takes quite a few shots, but eventually it'll do the job. This ice wall you have to pull up, otherwise it'll display a warning, and if you miss the warning, it'll kill you. Same thing at the end of this ice pick. You have to pull up, and that gets you to the submarine. So you get a bonus for the amount of planes that you've shot down. So I got 29 fuel awarded. You have to pull up here again, take off, and I'll be quiet now. So
I'm going to take her down. Invisibility again. You got me locked on. I'm going to take her up. Invisibility again. I'm going to take her down. It's fine.
love the soundtrack.
I just ran out of fuel, which gets you a game over. You shoot your initials, and you join the high score table. Interesting thing about the high score table, when you get there, if you turn the game control all the way to the right, it'll display the high score tables. And if you scroll down, you'll see the names of the developers scrolled top to bottom, which was the way of hiding them in the game. So this will be our probably, or hopefully, last repair video on Firefox, but we will probably do one more video just providing an overview of the game itself. So for now, Firefox.
Major, you will be flying the fastest, most sophisticated warplane on the face of this earth. We want you to fly the greatest warplane ever built. What is it? Russia. You've got to steal it.